It's time to rank some more villains. Last villain ranking videos I covered Bill Cipher, King Andreas, and Emperor Bellos. So today I'll be covering some other villains from Gravity Falls, Owl House, and Amphibia. Today we will be covering Gideon, the Core, and the Collector.
Spoiler alert, Stanford!
There will be spoilers for all three shows, so just be aware. Quick recap, I'll be ranking the villains based on these criteria points: character design, personality, powers and abilities, presence, effect on the protagonist, actions, and their conclusion. Since in the last video Bill won, I thought we would start with another Gravity Falls villain, Gideon. Little old Gideon is Gravity Falls' first major reoccurring villain. Despite the fact that he is Season 1's main threat, Gideon isn't often taken as a serious threat. In fact, he's nearly the Pines family's punching bag, getting mocked and teased for his failed evil plans.
Hey, nice outfit, Gideon. You actually look less girly than usual.
But despite his harmless-looking appearance, Gideon is capable of dark actions and is not to be taken lightly, so let's start with character design.
Let's see what this monster looks like.
Huh?
At first glance, Gideon doesn't look threatening, but behind his innocent appearance lies an evil mind. Gideon takes full advantage of his non-threatening appearance, using it to manipulate and control the people of Gravity Falls. He becomes a mini superstar to the town. Emphasis on mini, cause he's short! Hey yo! But while this small innocent appearance can be seen as a good thing, it's also a bit of a double-edged sword. It leads to him being an easy target of being made fun of. Our main characters for the most part don't feel fear or even threatened by Gideon, leading him to be the butt of many jokes. It also leads to one of my favorite jokes in Gravity Falls.
You might want to take another look there.
The shack is hereby signed over to... Suck a lemon, little man!
And because our main characters don't see him as a threat, neither do we, the audience. So unfortunately for Gideon, I'll be giving him a 2 out of 5 for appearance. I understand the point of Gideon isn't to appear threatening, but I still don't think he should be too high in appearance, but for what Gideon lacks in design, he makes up for in personality. Gideon truly shows his dark side through his personality. While he portrays himself as a cute star for the town, his angry outbursts show his true self.
I can squash you right now! Steel yourself, Gideon. You can use them. You can use them.
Gideon has some serious anger issues. His angry outbursts make him seem unstable and threatening. One of the most terrifying things about Gideon is the effect he's had on his mother. She seems traumatized, like a prisoner in her own home. Who knows what Gideon's done to render her this way? But despite his unhinged anger, Gideon is mostly a clever opponent. He's always planning ahead and knows when to improvise. He is also a master of manipulation, having everyone in Gravity Falls in the palm of his hand. Gideon is also very driven. He is determined to get what he wants, and he doesn't let grudges go, making him a persistent foe. While his plans aren't always great and are often easily defeated, you can always count on him coming back for round 2. I'll be giving Gideon a 3 out of 5 in personality. Powers and abilities. While Gideon is a normal human, he has a number of skills and tricks at his disposal. Gideon has Journal too, so this gives him access to a bunch of paranormal abilities. Gideon uses the journal to obtain a magic amulet, which gives him psychic powers, allowing him to move objects with his mind. He also uses the journal to mind control his dad. And finally, the journal allows Gideon to summon Bill Cipher. Aside from his magical abilities, Gideon's greatest power is his charisma. As mentioned, he is good at manipulating people, so they will often side with him against the Pines family. Gideon also uses his charisma to get a bunch of prisoner henchmen, so he never really has trouble getting allies. And finally, Gideon uses his charisma to get resources. He convinces Old Man McGucket to build him a giant mech suit that looks like him. Gideon literally has a giant robot. This is by far Gideon at his strongest, but despite all this, I'll have to give Gideon a low score in skills and abilities, since at the end of the day, he's just a kid. All these things I've listed can be taken away, and often are. And to be fair, in this villain ranking, he is going up against characters like Bill and the Collector and Emperor Bellos, so it wouldn't be fair to give him a high score in abilities. So Gideon gets a 2 out of 5 for powers and abilities. Presence. Many villains in my rankings have built up presence in their shows by teasing and showing the effects of the villain before they show up. often we have an understanding of what kind of threat they pose before they even show up in the show. But Gideon is different. Gideon is thrown straight into the show, appearing in episode 4 of season 1 of Gravity Falls. But he establishes his constant presence by his reappearances throughout the show. Even when Gideon isn't the main threat or villain for the episode, he often makes small appearances and cameos. But aside from this, he doesn't feel like he has a massive presence in the show. Normally his stories are contained to their episodes. It doesn't feel like his evil schemes are slowly building up in the background when it's not on screen, and it doesn't feel like he is having a massive impact on Gravity Falls itself. So I'll give Gideon a 2.5 for presence. Effects on the protagonist. While Gideon isn't as traumatizing as Bill or Bellows to his protagonists, he still does a good job at forcing our protagonist to evolve. In the Gravity Falls Season 1 finale, Gideon steals Journal 3 away from Dipper. He also crushes Dipper's confidence by taunting him and telling all his worth comes from the journal. This forces Dipper to self-reflect and build up more confidence in himself. He learns to rely on himself more and proves he is capable without the journal. Gideon also has an effect on Mabel, to a lesser extent. In Gideon's first episode, Gideon wants to date Mabel, but Mabel isn't into him, but is too afraid to tell him, so Dipper has to do it for her. Obviously Gideon doesn't take it well, so eventually Mabel is forced to confront Gideon herself, overcoming the fear of telling Gideon and becoming more honest. This overall doesn't really change or affect Mabel much in the long term, but it's still good development for Mabel. And finally, Gideon's main rival, Grunkle Stan. Honestly, their encounters don't change each other very much. They both just hate each other and have their back and forth thing, ending with one of them being humiliated at the end of the day. So overall, Gideon gets a 3 out of 5 for effects on our protagonists. Actions. Gideon does some pretty dastardly deeds. All his actions are driven by his desires, and he doesn't care who gets in his way. In fact, he revels in crushing his opponents. Gideon's most evil act is probably when he steals the Mystery Shack, taking the Pines family's home away from them, and forcing Grunkle Stan to send Dipper and Mabel home, leaving Gravity Falls. But this isn't even the worst bit. He takes Waddles away. Waddles, no! Unlike some of the other villains on this list, Gideon never murders anyone, to my knowledge, although he certainly comes very close to it a couple of times. Gideon nearly kills Dipper with some shears in his first appearance, and nearly crushes Dipper and Mabel in a fit of rage when they are shrunk. But in that episode, he does kidnap Dipper, Mabel, and Seuss, so you can add that to his criminal record. He also, in general, does a lot of property damage.
You little troll!
So I'll give Gideon a 3 out of 5 for actions. I know all his scores have been very mid, but in my opinion, he is kind of a mid villain. And now finally, conclusion. Does Gideon get a satisfying ending? At the end of season 1, Gideon is revealed to be a fraud and goes to jail. This felt very satisfying to me. It was nice seeing the Pines family redeemed in the town's eyes, and seeing the town finally see through Gideon's deception. But this isn't Gideon's proper ending. He returns in the Gravity Falls final, where he works for Bill, leading an army of prisoners in a post-apocalyptic Gravity Falls. He leads a Mad Max-styled gang, but Gideon has a change of heart, and finally decides to let Mabel go, knowing that she will never love him. Gideon does get a bit of a redemption arc, helping out Gravity Falls against Bill. He then, at the end of the show, begins trying to become a normal kid. This ending isn't bad, but it didn't leave much of an impact on me. Gideon's redemption isn't really explored very much, so the ending feels a little bit bland to me. For someone so evil to just going to be a normal kid feels a little unsatisfying. But his final scene is really funny.
I'm busting a move on this skating board.
More like busting your pants, loser.
So overall, I'll be giving Gideon a 2 out of 5 for his ending. Gideon got plenty of time to shine in season 1 of Gravity Falls, but he is more of a villain of the week character.
That guy, he's barely a villain of the week.
What'd you call me?
He's just set up for Gravity Falls' true villain, Bill Cipher. So Gideon's total score sits at a 17.5 out of 35, a very middle ground score for a mid-villain. Gideon's role isn't to be the greatest threat in Gravity Falls, so I think this score fits in reasonably, but if you feel I was too harsh on Gideon, feel free to let me know in the comments. The Core, an amalgamation of Amphibia's greatest minds. Last video, many of you wanted me to cover the Core instead of King Andrias, and I understand why, since the Core is behind everything. It is the big bad, but I don't know if I would say it's the main villain. It gets far less screen time and development compared to Andreas, and in its final fight, it's more of a force of nature than a villain. It's there as an obstacle for our protagonist to overcome, rather than a character. I feel the core has a lot of missed potential, and the show wasn't even cut early like the Owl House, so that's why I decided to cover Andreas last time. But now, let's dive into exploring the core. Character design. The core takes many forms, which makes sense since it's a bunch of different minds put together, so why not have different forms? The core's first form is a giant robot covered in eyes. Man, I just love this design. It's not messing around. This thing is straight up evil, and it's not afraid to show it. I love that in every shot it always towers over everyone. I mean, it even towers over King Andreas, and that dude is massive! The core's design reminds me of the robot in The Incredibles. It's simple, but effective. The most powerful part of the core's design is the distinct eyes. The core has a group of piercing evil eyes that carry over on all its designs. Aside from the main body of the core being covered in these eyes, the eyes can be found in most of the core's technology, ranging from King Andreas' crown, to Marcy's scythe, to just the rooms and wires themselves. This really gets the point across that the core is controlling everything and is everywhere. It's always watching. Now, let's talk about the second form, Darcy. The core takes control of Marcy, creating Darcy. This is essentially the core in human mode, and again, it looks great. The helmet is particularly expressive, giving us a strange mix of Marcy's goofiness and the core's evil. I love how the environment works in sync with her. It shows how in control the core is. And another great part about this design is the core's movement when controlling Darcy. It can be very loose or stiff, making her seem like a puppet, which she technically is. She even has the strings. The core also has a final boss form, which is literally the moon. This form is very similar to the core's first design, only it's the size of the moon. This causes some awesome shots. I just love this design. It honestly gives me Majora's Mask vibes. Now this last form is not directly the core, but it is the main mind in charge of the core, or at least that's how it seems, so I'll give it a mention. It's King Aldrich's design. King Aldrich is King Andreas' father, so obviously they look similar in design. The key differences are in Aldrich's face, which is a lot more grumpy and cold looking. The core uses King Aldrich as its face internally, and this leads to some creepy imagery. I love this twisted image of Aldrich's face with the core's eyes. It's just so messed up, bro. Again, credit to the core's eyes for being so interchangeable between designs. No matter what form the core takes, as long as it has those iconic eyes, we know who it is. I love the core's dark and twisted designs. I'll be giving the core a 4.5 out of 5 for character design. I think its design just really expresses the core well. It makes it super clear that the core is an amalgamation of minds, merged into one dark monstrous entity. Personality. This is where I think the core fumbles it a bit. Not because the core doesn't have an interesting personality, but I don't think it was explored enough. I don't think they fleshed out its personality enough, especially for a creature that is an amalgamation of minds. At first we don't get much from the core. We don't really hear it speak till it possesses Marcy. The core is just ominous at first. Once it possesses Marcy, the core goes from being a mysterious dark machine to being a goofy villain. After the core's eerie introduction, its next major appearance is kind of underwhelming. After the core takes control of Marcy, it picks up a lot of her quirks, making the core a goofy villain. It even calls itself Darcy for Dark Marcy. I feel after such a terrifying introduction, seeing the core face planting and eating cupcakes is a little underwhelming.
This thing needs some calibration.
And it's not that I hate a goofy villain or anything, it's just that the core was built up to be such a dark presence, so seeing its goofy side feels a bit off. And then later, in that episode, the core gets itself reprogrammed. I assumed this meant it would be eliminating some of its goofier traits, but not really. The core acts mostly the same after this. One major plus about Darcy's part of the core's personality is it knows exactly how to mess with Anne and Sasha. Since it is basically just evil Marcy, it knows everything about Anne and Sasha, allowing it to provoke them and really hit them where it hurts. Having Marcy's personality leak through also lets Anne and Sasha know Marcy is still in there, which makes it hurt more when it taunts them. It's especially effective in the fight with Sasha. But the core has another major personality, that being King Aldrich. King Aldrich seems to be the head of the core, and in the end, he's also its voice. King Aldrich is exactly what you would expect the core to be. He is cold and merciless. He only cares about himself, which makes him the perfect fit for the core. All it cares about is its self-preservation and power. I think some of the core's best moments is when Aldrich's personality slips through.
Why, son, I think I'm almost proud of you.
It is a great contrast to Marcy's goofiness. I think the core would have greatly been improved if during Darcy's goofy core moments, it flicked to King Aldrich. If we could see that dark personality leaking through, it would make Darcy more unpredictable and dangerous. Overall, the core's personality is very mixed. It's either being quiet and mysterious, or over-the-top goofy, or just very dark and disturbing. But we don't really get to explore any of these aspects of the core. Instead, we are just given little snippets into what I think could have been an amazing character. I just feel the core has lots of missed opportunities, so I'll only be giving the core a 2 out of 5 for personality. When the core is being foreshadowed, it's extremely dark and creepy, having some of the most disturbing scenes in Amphibia, which I can't believe they get away with, to be honest. But when it comes time for it to be front and center, it falls flat in its face. Powers and abilities. The core has a wide range of abilities. The core, being a giant computer, is very focused on control and directing. One of the core's biggest assets is its control over the robot factories scattered across Amphibia, allowing the core to assemble a giant army whenever it needs. It literally builds an army in just a couple of moments. But giant armies of robots isn't the only thing the core can control. It also has a knack of controlling people as well. The core develops mind-controlling collars, allowing it to enslave anyone it wants, or anything. The core takes advantage of Amphibia's more deadly wildlife for its army. On top of this, it also has a mind-influencing device it uses to keep Andreas in line. The core also has its giant flying fortress, equipped with a massive cannon at its disposal. This fortress can obliterate buildings and travel between dimensions. But all of this sounds minor compared to the core's greatest weapon, the moon. The core has transformed Amphibia's moon into one big vessel/base. It's filled with legions of robots to protect itself, and it's loaded with cannons. As a failsafe, the core can crash the moon into Amphibia, destroying everything. That seems pretty OP to me. Some of the core's abilities that aren't just resources it's created is its general fighting skills. The core wipes the floor with Sasha and Grime. They only get one on the core when it's distracted. And of course, the core can take control of people, being able to use them as vessels for it to inhabit. But all of these resources come from the core's main ability, its intelligence. All its technology and backup plans come from its cold calculating intelligence and drive to survive. I'll put the core at a 4 out of 5. The core has the power to destroy Amphibia, but there are literally gods on this list, so I couldn't give it a 5. Presence. The core and King Andreas aren't even mentioned in Season 1, and even then, the core isn't teased until Season 2, Episode 14, The First Temple.
The prophecy is being undone as we speak, my lord. Soon, we will have our revenge.
Yep, that scene is it, until Season 3, Episode 13. In total, the core only appears in 6 stories, and is mentioned in a few others. So the core is used very sparingly. In fact, the main characters aren't even made aware of its existence till the episode titled Beginning of the End, while we, the audience, is made aware that there is something out there pulling the strings. The core itself doesn't make much impact on the world, and I know that's probably ironic since the core probably makes the most visual change to the world than any of the other shows I've talked about. The core acts more like a force of nature. It's just there to push the main characters to develop. Despite being the one in charge, the role of the main villain falls more to Andreas than the core. Andreas is teased to be the villain in Season 2, Episode 11, a full 15 episodes before the core is even mentioned. And a lot of the big choices fall to Andreas over the core. This is why in my first villain ranking, I decided to cover Andreas instead of the core. Andreas is just more of the prime villain, despite not being the one pulling the strings. So, I'll only be giving the core a 2 out of 5 for presence. The mystery and intrigue of its first appearance is enough to have it linger in the back of our minds, but overall, it really doesn't feel like the one driving the plot. Effects on the protagonist. Probably the person affected the most by the core is Marcy, since it literally takes control of her body, so obviously it's going to have some serious effects on her. The core forces Marcy to reflect on herself. By trapping her in an ideal world, she has to choose between false happiness or facing the harsh reality and dealing with its consequences. This helps her to realize that she was already running away from her problems and hiding in a fantasy world by traveling to Amphibia. This helps her to decide to face her problems. In choosing to hide in her fantasy world, she's been selfish by trapping her friends in it as well. This is probably the most direct effect on a character the core has. The core also affects our main character, Anne. When the core decides to destroy Amphibia, it forces Anne to choose between herself and Amphibia, choosing to sacrifice herself to save Amphibia. While this may sound like a major effect from the core, I don't really think it is. The world of Amphibia changed and developed Anne to this point, so the core is more like her final test. It didn't really change her much, it was just the final push she needed to complete her arc. The choice isn't really about the core at all. We could have got to this point in Anne's development without the core. So in terms of effect on the protagonist, I'm going to have to give the core another low score of 2 out of 5. Actions. What evil deeds does the core do? Now, I'll be referring to the things the core directly does, so I won't be counting things it's done through others. Anything Andreas did is on him, not the core. Despite the core's small screen presence, it gets a lot done. In its first major appearance, it takes control of Marcy, in probably Amphibia's most disturbing scene. With only one other potential contender.
I just need to...
Thanks, Andreas. Anyway, the core's possession scene is horrifying. Then we also have when the core was leading its invasion on Earth, where it gets its gamer moves on.
Gamer moment.
Its next major action is when the core decides to get a bit more personal in the fight with Sasha and Grime. The core goes to strike down Sasha, but Grime is like, "Get down, Mr. President!" and takes the hit. The core just cuts his arm off. And of course, the core's most evil action is when it's a sore loser and decides to crash the moon into Amphibia to wipe everyone out. So overall, in its short time on screen, the core didn't waste a moment of it. It does so many evil actions. I'll give the core a 3.5 out of 5 for actions. Conclusion. Does the core have a good ending? I'm very torn on its ending because the core has an amazing end, but it's not because of the core at all. The core crashing the moon into Amphibia forces Anne to choose to absorb the power of the 3 Calamity Gems. She unleashes its power, completely destroying the core / the moon. While this is up there as one of my favorite moments in Amphibia, it's not really because of the core at all. The core is just the general threat, but doesn't add much character to this final battle. I mean, as it dies, it literally says nothing. And that's fine because the final fight isn't about the core, but this ranking is. So even though I love this fight and I love this scene, I don't think the core should get the credit for that. So I'll be giving the core, again, 2 out of 5. I swear I'm not trying to be biased. So overall, the core's final score is 20.5 out of 35. I think the core has lots of potential, but it is sort of sidelined. It's mostly used as just a way to progress the plot. All the personality was given to King Andreas, leaving the core a cool concept, but there's just not enough for it to thrive. The Collector. It's hard to directly call the Collector a villain. His intentions aren't really malicious like Belos or any of the other villains, but the Collector is still an antagonist, even if that's not his intention. In the Owl House universe, there is a mysterious race known as the Collectors. They seem to be cosmic beings that search the stars collecting other races. They are extremely powerful and can shape the world to their will. The Collector we see was trapped at a young age for his race, and would remain trapped till King's Tide. Character design. The Collector has 2 designs, this main design and his shadow design. Let's start with the shadow design. While it looks simple at first, this design is used in really interesting ways. It's constantly moving and shape-shifting. This design is just so flexible. It really gets across the excitable nature of the Collector. This shadow form of the Collector is sort of a projection. Since the Collector is trapped, he uses this shadow form to communicate. This design hints at the Collector's main design, with its sun and moon-like face, and star symbols. I really just love this design. It's just so expressive and intriguing, a perfect teaser for what's to come. Once the Collector is free, we see his true form. Like Gideon, this form doesn't really look intimidating. In fact, it is very innocent looking, since he's still a child. His design really pops with the moon pattern on his face and purple sun moon outfit. While none of this screams scary villain, the uncertainty of what he's capable of is where his real danger comes from. I'll give the Collector a 3.5 out of 5, since his design really achieves what it's aiming for, and it's just a really striking design, but since this is a villain ranking list, I can't give him too high of a score, because if you just saw a picture of the Collector without knowing the context of the show, you probably wouldn't see him as a threat. Personality. The Owl House was cut short, having its third season cut into 3 episodes. And I think this had a significant impact on the Collector. If you look at the Collector in Season 2, he seems fairly different from Season 3. In Season 2, when the Collector is still trapped and is helping Belos, he seems a lot crueler than he would appear to be in Season 3. Well, yes, he is still acting like a kid constantly, wanting to play. He has a cruel streak for him, getting excited about the draining spell, laughing at the idea of it. He mentions it multiple times, how he's eager to see everyone go, "Ah!"
Play and see everything go all...
Now this could be him being excited to be free, since after the draining spell, Belos said he would free the Collector. Spoiler alert, that ain't happening. But the Collector also seems to take a lot of enjoyment from Belos killing the Grimwalkers he creates. And in general, he just seems far more mocking at first. But once he escapes, he seems completely different. Once he's out, he seems like an out-of-control child. He doesn't seem intentionally sinister at all. A lot of the traits of the current Collector can be seen in the Shadow Collector. I think due to Season 3 being shortened, they had to skip a bunch of the character development. When we see the Collector in shadow form, he is working for Belos, so being around Belos is probably influencing the way he's acting. But aside from his character inconsistencies, let's talk about how the Collector is in Season 3. He doesn't really act much like a villain, because he isn't really one. The Collector, being a godlike entity, is far above humans and witches, and therefore doesn't value life the same as we do. In fact, he doesn't seem to understand death, leading to his mistreatment of people, turning people into puppets. He just doesn't understand the suffering they are going through, so he doesn't realize how much of a villain he appears to be to the people. It's clear that the Collector is just an innocent child who is extremely lonely, causing him to act the way he does. As most children are, the Collector is very naive to the harm he's causing. The Collector doesn't have evil motives, all he cares about is playing and making friends. But despite not being evil, he still acts as a great threat. I'll give the Collector a 3 out of 5 for personality, since I think he works well as a threat, but the contrast in personality does feel very abrupt. Powers and abilities. Man, I can tell you right now that the Collector is definitely getting a 5 out of 5 for power. He rivals Bill's Cypher. In the first moments of him being free, the Collector absolutely destroys Belos. We have spent the whole show establishing how big of a threat Belos is, so to see the Collector so casually destroy him just sets the bar so high. But in case that wasn't enough of a flex for you, the Collector then just casually moves the moon with his finger. It literally takes him 0 effort. After this, he starts causing other havoc. He creates a bunch of star henchmen who go around turning people into puppets and collecting them. He can cause mass illusions to perceive the world as he wants, and he can pretty much do whatever he wants. He's very similar to Bill Cipher. They both have giant floating homes, they collect people, and they both can manipulate reality however they want. The Collector's only downside is that he's weak to Titan magic, but his power is still so great that I will keep it at a 5 out of 5 for power. Presence. There are lots of little hints of the Collector throughout Season 2, like Ida's Owl Beast dream, and Philip summoning him. But at this point, we don't know what he's doing in these scenes. The Collector doesn't feel like he has much of a presence throughout the show. He's more of an accessory to Emperor Belos. That is, until he is released. The show spends most of its time setting up Belos as the big bad, so the Collector is more of a surprise twist. I'll only be giving him a 2 out of 5 for presence. Effects on the protagonist. Honestly, the protagonists have much more of an effect on the Collector. They help him understand proper friendship, and more importantly, the value of life, helping him to understand the damage he is causing. The Collector does have an effect on King though. Back in Season 1, King was pretty immature and wanted to be a mighty ruler, having power over others. But as Season 2 went on, he discovered more about himself. The Collector shows him what he could have turned out like if he kept going down the path he started on. The Collector also forces King to mature a bit, since King has to look out for his friends and try to keep the Collector in line. So overall, I'll only be giving the Collector a 1.5 out of 5 for effects on the protagonist, since I think King was changing this way anyway, after discovering he was a Titan. Actions. What dastardly deeds does the Collector get up to? Well, there's actually not a lot. He gives Belos his power and teaches him the draining spell, but if I'm going by what I said for the core, I won't count this, since Emperor Belos used that power for evil. You could say he hunted the Owl Beast, but we don't even have confirmation that this Collector in the flashback is even our Collector, so I can't give him credit for this. So what can I give him credit for? Well, his worst action is how he collects everyone. Wow, crazy. Or, to be more precise, how he traps them in their own bodies, trapped as dolls in his collection, being only let free when he wants to play with them. Yeah, that is pretty forked. The Collector just doesn't seem to understand the negative effects of what he's doing. Along with turning everyone into dolls, he also causes an apocalypse on the Boiling Isles. The Collector turns the Boiling Isles into his own personal play area. Everyone who hasn't been captured is thrown into an apocalyptic scenario. Everywhere is graffitied and damaged and deserted, but while it's also in shambles, that can change at any moment if the Collector shows up. It then becomes an over-the-top cutesy version of their reality. The Collector has created a dangerous and unstable world for the remaining citizens of the Boiling Isles. So overall, the Collector's worst action is him forcing his will on everyone else. His crime is his lack of value of life, so he doesn't understand that he's destroying lives. But other than these, he doesn't really do anything actively malicious. He never actually tries to be evil or to do evil things, so I don't think again I can give him too high of a score, especially since he corrects all of his actions by the end. But still, his actions would have been devastating for the people of the Boiling Isles, so I'll give the Collector a 3 out of 5 for actions. Conclusion. Does the Collector have a good conclusion? I really like the Collector's arc, especially for the short time period they had to do it. Once the Collector was released, it was clear he wasn't really a villain. So it's nice in his conclusion, seeing the Collector personally free all of the citizens. But it still leaves a massive problem. What do you do with a character so powerful? And honestly, I think the Owl House kinda took the boring way out. During Luce's ending monologue, he just kinda leaves. It's nice to see that King has grown to care for the Collector, but honestly, it's the easiest and boringest solution, him just going off to the stars again. Now, I don't hold it against the Owl House. Since the 3rd season was cancelled and condensed into 3 episodes, they obviously had to cut and shorten a lot, and it's clear that there was originally going to be a lot more focus on the Collector and his apocalyptic Boiling Isles. It probably would have been somewhat similar to Amphibia Season 3, having half the season on Earth, and having the second part in the apocalyptic Amphibia. But still, I don't think the Collector's ending is that interesting. It's literally just brought up in the monologue, so I'll only be giving the Collector a 1 out of 5 for his conclusion. It would have been nice to see more than him just kinda getting blown off in the ending monologue. But to be honest, I'm not even sure if I'm judging the Collector very fairly, since he isn't truly a villain, and it feels the Collector is a little unfinished. The Collector's final score is 19 out of 35. While I haven't given him a great score, I still love this character. I just don't love him as a villain, which isn't really who he is. So let's see what the final scores are. Gideon came in last place with 17.5 out of 35. Then in second place, we have the Collector with 19 out of 35. And finally, the Core with 20.5 out of 35. Keep in mind, my criteria is designed to identify what makes the best villain, not necessarily the best character. But now that we have the final scores, let's add them with the last villain scores. Looking at it like this, we can see that the Core just fell behind Andreas by half a point. And we can see Gravity Falls villains occupy first and last place, with Bill Cipher not even being contested for the first place. But if we're going by power levels only, he would have been equal with the Collector, which makes sense since they are both basically gods. So what did you guys think of this ranking? Was it accurate? Or was I just too harsh in this video? I think I might have been a little harsh, to be honest with you. But what villains do you want ranked next? I'll do a poll on my channel after this video goes live. I'm thinking maybe we could do some DreamWorks villains, and to be more specific, I would love to do some Kung Fu Panda villains, or maybe some classic Disney villains, or maybe even some random ones from the shows I talked about in my animated shows recommendation video. And yes, I will be doing the Lich from Adventure Time. I heard the comments loud and clear in the last video, and I just have to finish rewatching Adventure Time first. Also, I'm considering doing a protagonist ranking between Anne, Luce, and Dipper, but I need to come up with a criteria first, and to be honest, I'm kinda scared of getting torn apart for that one. But we will see. Thank you for bearing with me. I'll catch you in the next video.